Good morning, Potsdam! Or, as we're about to find out in this video today, we might say, Ayo, Potsdam! So, today, in our third episode of Good Morning Potsdam, we're going to take a little look at a banger from 1975 by British comedy troupe the Goodies, who released a song called Black Pudding Bertha. She's the queen of Northern Soul. So, 1975 was an exceptionally good year for humanity. Yours truly was born, and the Goodies, a British comedy troupe, were riding pretty high on a wave of popularity. They'd released a variety of comedic songs. Their TV show was super popular. And 5 of their songs between 1974 and 1975 made it into the UK Top 40. And so the song we're going to examine today, Black Pudding Bertha, She's the Queen of Northern Soul, reached number 19 in 1975 on the UK Top 40 charts. So, a little background, especially for our American audience who's not aware of perhaps who the Goodies are. The Goodies were 3 comedians who had a sort of sketch comedy show, and they would do these little skits about sort of like being out of work and like trying to get a job and stuff like that. And sometimes their comedy would sort of touch on things that were happening in the times around in England in the 70s. And their show ran into the early 80s, and maybe even around the world a little bit. In a lot of ways, the Goodies were often compared to alternative comedy troupe Monty Python Flying Circus, and this is because the Monty Python folks and the Goodies were all in university together. And so they were students, and they were comedians, and they were entertainers, and they sort of knew each other and interacted together and often did comedy together. And in fact, the comedians in the Goodies appear in a variety of Monty Python-related projects. And it was not uncommon for members of Monty Python's Flying Circus to appear in the Goodies. And so there's one episode where John Cleese appears as a genie in one of the Goodies skits. The Goodies were considered to be more of a children's act. Their comedy was not often viewed in the same sort of adult sense as perhaps Monty Python's Flying Circus, but it didn't make them necessarily less popular in the UK. They were very popular in their own right. The 3 comedians sort of played stereotypes of British culture, sort of the upper class, like Tory person, then kind of like a working class individual from sort of the northern UK, and then sort of like this, kind of intellectual British stiff upper lip kind of type. And so they would often get into these sort of funny, little adventures and things like that. And so one of the comedy troupe, a gentleman called Bill Oddie, wrote all the music. And so music was a big part of the Goodies. They had a very popular theme song. And then they had a variety of songs that were also featured in the show. And Black Pudding Bertha, She's the Queen of Northern Soul, was one of those songs. So, Black Pudding Bertha came to me, as I mentioned in our last episode, from our family friend Alan's DJ cast-offs. And so I remember, sort of as a young kid, being familiar with the Goodies and probably watching some episodes. I'm getting old now, so I don't really remember a lot of that. I just know that, I liked it, and I liked their songs, right? They had a variety of songs, and I really enjoyed those. And then as I got older, I started to understand some of the nuance and some of the layer and some of the social commentary in those songs. And so then I kind of liked them, even more. And as I became a sociologist, there were various other things about the goodies that, I've come to enjoy and appreciate and like in the music. So, Black Pudding Bertha is a comedy song that the Goodies released that is sort of um, talking about a few different Britishisms, one of which is the food, the black pudding. Now, you may have heard of the black pudding, and British cuisine is not always known for being something that is, very edible outside of England. It's often thought of to be bland and, kind of disgusting and things like that. And so there's a little bit of a play on the idea that British food, like the black pudding, might be a little, kind of gross, not good for you, kind of thing, which you'll hear in just a minute. If you're not familiar with the black pudding, if you don't know what it is, the black pudding in a sociology of food sense is a poverty food. So you're butchering an animal, right? And the black pudding we can date back to the 1400s, so it's been around for a long time in various forms. There are lots of regional varieties of the black pudding throughout the United Kingdom. And so, what would happen is you slaughter an animal, a pig or whatever, and blood would be the first thing to kind of spoil. But you didn't want to waste it. You wanted to use it in some way, shape, or form. So black pudding sort of emerges from kind of taking the blood of a slaughtered animal and mixing it with fat and suet and like some sort of cereal. So oats are often used. Some people use breadcrumbs. And you kind of mix all of this stuff up, and it forms what British people call pudding, but not a dessert pudding. So let's be clear there. And so you end up with this thing, and it kind of congeals, and it, there might be some meat scraps in it. I'm not really sure. Recipes vary, but blood. So it's a kind of a blood sausage, and then the cereal part and the fat. Are all sort of the staples. And then there are various spices that are put in depending on regional variations. And so it creates this, kind of sausage-looking thing, and it was, encased in intestines. And so in some ways you might think of it as like a summer sausage, even though it's not, and we call it a pudding. But in many ways it's sort of treated like a sausage, right? So most British people might see the black pudding as part of a breakfast, a traditional British fry-up. And so you would, have maybe your bacon, maybe a regular, kind of sausage. You might have fried tomatoes, mushrooms, baked beans. You can't forget British baked beans. And unlike American baked beans, they are vegan friendly because they're tomato based sauces as opposed to having pork in them. So you can eat British baked beans. And British people eat baked beans with everything. And so we eat it with breakfast. So you'll get that. Maybe get some fried bread. And then you'll get, a couple of pieces of black pudding in there. Black pudding may also be served in bars. Go into a pub and have some beer. And there might be some, black pudding kind of served cold, almost, again, like a summer sausage kind of thing. And black pudding gets its name from what eventually evolved into this black casing that now, black pudding is traditionally found in. So a very important staple throughout different parts of England, Lancashire, Yorkshire, Scotland. They're all, like I said, all sorts of regional variations. And so Bill Oddie was a Lancashire young man, and so he wrote this song kind of about an important part of his British culture, and sort of equates the black pudding with this mythical woman in the song called Bertha. And so he talks about Bertha's sort of attractive elements and how she reminds him, right, of a black pudding. And so he's attracted to her because she has like these black pudding sort of qualities, which is half the fun, in the song. Because this song was released in 1975, it's obviously not uncommon for popular music to engage in the objectification or commodification of women. And so there is that sort of misogyny element there that we see in pop and rock music and things like that. But this song actually predates some of the most famous examples of this. This song comes out 2 years before AC/DC releases Whole Lotta Rosie in 1977. Comes out 3 years before Queen releases Fat Bottom Girls in 1978. And even years before, Sir Mix-a-Lot came out with the, sort of ultimate banger of, I Like Big Butts. Right? So Black Pudding Bertha, is out front, engaging in some body positivity, about women, big, beautiful women, kind of ahead of the curve, right? But again, in a very sort of tongue-in-cheek, kind of British way. The song also features some Britishisms, right? So there's a line that you're going to hear in the song where Bill Oddie exclaims, "E by gum!" And "E by gum" is this kind of British saying of surprise, right? When you don't want to say a swear word, so when you don't want to say, holy crap or something like that, right? You might be like, "E by gum!" And for those of you who are wondering where my accent went, it faded a long time ago. I've been out of the UK since the 1990s, and unfortunately, it doesn't come back very strong anymore. But as a British person who's misses England on a regular basis, misses the UK on a regular basis, words that I don't use anymore that I miss. I miss hearing people say things like "E by gum" and "A up," right? So this was a kind of a funny song in that way. The Goodies, right, as I said, were kind of overshadowed by Monty Python. But the Goodies actually have some really important contributions that have still impacted us today in, kind of modern culture. For those of you who are Monty Python fans, if you are like me, one of the first things you really introduced you to Monty Python was the Holy Grail movie. And so one of the funniest things in the Holy Grail movie, right, is that they're not riding horses. They're, running around, and they've, got the coconuts, and they're banging the coconuts together to sound like horses. And so that's often credited to Michael Palin. Before the Holy Grail was produced, the Goodies did the same thing in a bit in one of their shows. They had this thing where they used coconut shells. And so the credit really should go to the Goodies that they came up with that gag first. It's just Monty Python, especially since these guys knew each other and interacted together. They took it and borrowed it and just had a more popular platform kind of thing. So we probably wouldn't be talking about coconuts representing horses the way we do if not for the Goodies. Another thing, especially since we're talking about music, one of the things that were kind of funny is the Goodies in the 1970s were kind of making fun of sort of kung fu action films and their popularity. And so there's an episode of the Goodies where they create a martial art form called Eki Thump. And Bill Oddie, the Lancashire man, has a fight with a gentleman. I believe he was Scottish or pretending to be Scottish in the show. And he fights the Scottishman with a pair of black pudding nunchucks. And I think you can probably find this video on YouTube. I find it hilarious. I think it's hilarious as all get out. And so Eki Thump was like this British fighting style, right? If British people had a martial art, it would be called Eki Thump. That's what we would do. And so it's a funny bit, right? Flash forward to Jack White of the White Stripes and his album Icky Thump, ICKY, and Ecky Thump, ECKY. Jack White is giving a nod to the Goodies, but he said he changed it from Ecky to Icky because his target audience, the younger people who are going to be buying his music, Icky was going to sound a little bit more acceptable to them, especially since they probably wouldn't know what Ecky Thump was really sort of all about. So the Goodies had a very important contribution for our modern culture, and so there's been lots of reunion shows that have come out involving the Goodies and things like that. And so, anyway, let's get to the song. So listen to this banger. It's lots of fun. Always puts a smile on my face. And so, if you've never heard it before, let me introduce you to Black Pudding Bertha. She's the queen of Northern Soul, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Ooh, she
Life doesn't wait, and neither should you.
Commercials.
Aleve can help you deal with pain less throughout your day. Whether it's a long day on your feet, a demanding workout, or everyday aches and pains, you need relief that can...
I had to edit that out, but I have no idea how to do that because I'm old and I'm not a cool social media influencer. So that was the banger Black Pudding Bertha. And again, puts a smile on my face every time I hear it. So that was our episode today. Welcome to episode 3. Here's the end of episode 3. And I will see you probably some other time that I need to waste a little bit of my time and a little bit of yours. Take care.